Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Engagement Designer demo series. In the last episode, we went over the Bundles tab of the Administration Console, and how in that tab we can handle all of the .jar files that can be added and removed from this Avaya Breeze instance right here. In this episode, we're going to go over the Routing tab of the Administration Console, and how we can refine and detail information that comes in from the event catalog, which we talked about how the event catalog hosts all the recent events that can be added and removed from the Avaya Breeze event bus. In the Routing tab, we can see here that it looks a lot like the other tabs that we've gone over. We have a search functionality where we can define our search based on keywords. Here I'm defining based on a specific phone number that I'm going to use to show the routing of a phone call coming into our Avaya Breeze system. Also, we have a refresh functionality where we can refresh the page here and refresh the information under this tab. And we also have a drop-down that allows us to hide and show different columns within this tab. As an example here, I have our rule name, which is a phone number and called. This is saying that when this phone number is called to or dialed to from the outside world, it is going to run this workflow. As you can see before, I had my workflow called complex workflow, and that complex workflow is going to get an interaction between an in-calling customer and connect them with an agent. This call is triggering an event based on our event bus, where the event is under the type event family call intercepted, event type call intercepted to called party, and the event version is 1. This means that whenever this phone number is called to, the call is being intercepted based on dialing into a called party. The called party being this phone number right here, and the calling person into that phone number being the customer, which in case will be my personal cell phone number. The way to think of this is that in the event catalog, we have a call intercepted call family. And that call intercepted event family, I should say, is basically waiting for any phone call to come into our Avaya Breeze system. The beauty of it is instead of anytime somebody calls into Avaya Breeze using any sort of one of our phone numbers, we're going to refine that based on the called to. And that's basically what number we're dialing to. So we're defining it as anytime somebody dials to this phone number, this workflow is going to run. So if I were to call to that phone number right now, it's going to create a new instance of complex workflow. This is all handled using the Avaya Breeze event bus, and the defining just happens within this routing here, where we define what the event family, event type, and workflow tied to that event family and type are. As an example here, I can edit this rule name, called the phone number called, and I can edit it showing what sort of functionality and routing I want tied to it. As an example here, I see I have my family and type as call intercepted, call intercept to called party version 1 as my event family, event type, and version. And my listed workflow I have is just complex workflow latest. The difference between here so here we're showing there's a difference between latest and version 1. If I were to have selected just version 1, every time this routing instance was ran into, it would run version 1 of complex workflow. If, however, I were to have complex workflow latest, it would run the latest version of complex workflow. So that means I could develop past workflow, complex workflow version 1, and have version 2, 3, 4, and so on, and this would automatically map it to the latest version of that developed workflow. If I have it selected as version 1, I could develop past version 1 here as 2, 3, and 4, and it would still only run version 1 of that complex workflow right here. As you can see, there's a check mark that shows which workflow is currently selected. And the beauty of the development here is that we can have multiple workflows run on a single routed rule. By showing here multiple checkboxes, I can have multiple workflows ran all at the same time. Things can get very complex doing that, so it's highly recommended to know your development schema and what you need to run based on an incoming interaction based on that routing rule. I'm going to leave it as complex workflow latest, so that is my only one checked. And then I gave the name of my workflow here as the phone number and called. So you can see here I'm just showing by selecting and deleting that, I can see there's enter rule name That's the rule name that will show up within the administration console here. I just call it simply the phone number and then called, saying that anytime this phone number is called, I will run this workflow. The logic behind it is actually at the bottom here. At the bottom here, I can see under this advanced button, I will open up a rules editor. In the rules editor, I can see there is the call event, called party, and handle. This is a structure that is handled based on that event that I defined called call intercept to called party. Within that event, I see there is an object called called party and a string called handle. All I'm doing here is saying, based on the handle of who I'm calling to in this system, if it is matching to this schema, which you'll recognize was the phone number in that rule name, if it is matching to that by saying index of, which is a function, oops, messed that up there, sorry about that, index of, based on the index of this, if it is greater than or equal to 0, meaning that if there is a 1 or plus 1 in front of this, we are going to call to this workflow tied to this rule. This is just handling the opportunity that there may or may not be a plus sign in front of this phone number here. All rules can be changed and defined within this editor tool here, where we can see the list of variables within that call intercepted to called party version 1 event. You can see listed here all of the objects that are under that event, and I could do any sort of rule based on objects within that event. I can also see there is a global variables object, which we'll get to in a minute here. Off to the right of the rules editor, we'll see there are operators. Because the expression runs on Boolean expression nomenclature, we're going to have operators that define the Boolean. So because we're checking to see if the index of this is greater than or equal to 0, that is going to return true or false. If you, however, did not want to go based on index, you could also go to our functions tab at the bottom here and go all the way to string and look for, I'm trying to find it, string. You could have starts with, which could check for the string starts with that certain number, or you could do a comparison using math, and you can do a sort of change, I'm trying to find it here, parse int, which will parse the int of the string because the phone number of the handle, which is basically the person calling in their phone number, will come in as a string. You could parse it to an int and then do a comparison using a math function such as is equal to min max or min math max or math min. You could do comparisons on that, or you can just do a parse int of that handle and then say equals and then a specific phone number. Those are all just different ways to do expressions. Expressions you can think of, like I said, as Boolean nomenclature, where you would do as in coding, you would do for if statements or for loops. Without getting too technical, it's just important to know that the expression here is something that we need to define in order to make this rule happen based on a certain event. I'll click cancel here because I don't want to change any of this. But going back to the original tab, I can see that my routing then, anytime somebody is calling to this specific phone number, my workflow from before called complex workflow will run. Manage global variables is something that we have added within Breeze 3.5 to allow you to add global variables within an Avaya Breeze system. This is a way of doing things such as naming complex types, maybe adding a certain URL for a database, or any sort of global variable that you want to have readily available across your Engagement Designer platform here. Without getting too into it, it's just important to know that global variables are known throughout the Engagement Designer platform, both within Administration Console and the Engagement Designer tool. We'll close out of that. So we went through and we edited this rule here. I didn't create one, so I'll show that you can also create one. It runs very much the same as editing. And then you can also enable and disable rules. We can see right here this one's enabled, so that means that this rule will actually run if I were to dial this phone number. We can then disable the rule, which will then disable the functionality of this rule and no longer allow it to run. That actually concludes the last tab of our administration console. So in the next video, we are going to finally get into developing workflows using the Engagement Designer tool. All the videos in the past year have gone over each one of the tabs of the Engagement Designer Administration Console tool. And it's important to know that the Administration Console is there in order for you to manage and administer all of the workflows you will develop within the Engagement Designer tool.